What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Sector Unknown, an indie CRPG that released in full a couple of weeks ago out of its early access period. But before we dive into all that, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below covering everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. But in the case of Sector Unknown, it's also important that I tell you, I received a review copy of this game when it released into early access quite some time ago, like the beginning of 2025, roughly, I think. It's been a minute, so I don't remember exactly, but seeing it launch into, of course, its full version, I knew I wanted to review it, and it being a CRPG, my interest was obviously piqued. What's more, as the 100% goes, it's not a terribly difficult thing to do, but if you do have any specific questions, the creator, Creative Storms Entertainment, which is mostly just one person, has been incredibly responsive in the game's Steam forums and everything, so if you have a question, I've personally found a bunch of answers there, and I imagine you probably would as well if you are looking for something incredibly specific. Otherwise, let's talk about the game itself. So, as I mentioned, this is essentially an indie CRPG made almost entirely by one person as far as I know. And it's an indie CRPG that sees you rallying several different planets against a galactic corporation known as Star Frontiers across all sorts of different situations, you yourself being an escaped prisoner. And it's a game that I would say gets to the bottom of that sort of core fantasy really well, and also provides a bunch of great choices and consequences and an interesting narrative to follow. And yet, in being an indie CRPG made by one person, I do think there's a couple of things to know that are more than likely obvious just from that description, but still something to be aware of. For starters, as you would expect, the game certainly has some rough edges. There's nothing like voice acting, etc. Those things are expensive to add, and so there's stuff like that straight away, but there's also, I would say, things to be aware of in terms of balancing and the like. In particular, I would say it's far too easy to get the perfect solutions to the situations you find yourself in. Personally, I would have seen those require a little more effort. I also found combat to be a very bursty endeavor. You are often either missing or grazing, which means you do like 0 or 1 damage, or you kill the enemy in one hit because you do like 1200 damage, and there really just wasn't a lot of in between. Most things don't survive more than a single hit. On higher difficulties, the more likely that is to swing the other way against you as well, and so there's some stuff like that to know, but by and large it seems like if you are into CRPGs, you will likely enjoy this smaller indie experience that in total might run you 30 hours for the 100%, probably 15 to 20 for the story. But if anything, I think a game like this, and especially with how combat is handled, I think it could probably take a cue from some of the other indie CRPGs I've seen where they basically cut combat entirely by making it a % chance to win an encounter based on your setup versus the enemies, things like that, because the combat here I don't think is strong enough to be especially worthwhile of a time sink, and so sidestepping it for the people who are just interested in the story and the choices and everything I don't think would be the worst thing in the world. And again, I've seen other indie CRPGs do that with some success. But let's dig a little deeper into this game and talk about stuff individually. So this is a game that was made in Unity, and you can tell because that brings us to the technical state. The issues I had with this game are issues that I have had with a significant amount of games that were also made in Unity. If you play it long enough, it starts to lag. What starts out as a relatively smooth experience in terms of load times and stuff sort of explodes as the game carries on. In particular, saving in the late game takes like a few seconds of the game like actively freezing as the game saves. You get a lot of slowdown that you might have to just fully restart the game to clear. Again, all issues that are more about the engine it uses than this specific game itself, but they are issues nonetheless that people should be aware of, and that was the bulk of what I ran into technical problem-wise. Now, I will say there were a few quests that seemed to have like fully bugged out on me that I could not finish, and it typically involved NPCs becoming like completely unresponsive in the sense of like, hey, go talk to this guy, and then that guy refuses to talk to you. Luckily, these were small side quests that were easily ignored and they weren't a huge deal, but that was about what I ran into in terms of problems. Moving on a little bit, let's next up talk difficulty. This game does feature several difficulties from story to, I believe it's called Nightmare. Now, I would not describe this as a particularly difficult game, but the higher you go up in difficulty, the easier it is for enemies to also be very bursty towards you. Now, with the way this game, I would say, favors intelligence builds, what tends to happen if you're on just normal, is that you might have a little bit of trouble in the beginning as you get your build together, and you might have other ways around those encounters first. Once you get past those first few levels and you start getting like your proper combat builds together, which in part comes down to basically just raising up hit chance and stuff, you go from either missing or just instantly killing the enemy, and again, there's not much in between that I found, and it felt like if you mess around on higher difficulties, it just made the enemy more likely to do that to you, and then combat encounters felt much more RNG as a result. But that brings us to character creation. Now, there is a little bit of basic cosmetic character creation here, where we can pick a little bit of what our character looks like and everything, but as this is an isometric CRPG, and an indie one at that no less, it's not exactly mind-blowing. Really, the mechanical side of this is probably the more important stuff. The first things you're going to pick are your conviction and personality perks. So you start as an ex-prisoner no matter what, but you do have a little bit of say-so in what you went to prison for, which can then adjust various little perks and bonuses that you get, like, extra perk points for level, that kind of thing. Personality is much the same. It will typically give you a bonus to your skills as well as an attribute, which is a helpful place to start, but not the be-all end-all by any means. Then we have our attributes and skills. Now, this game, I would say, makes not exactly a mistake, but a choice that a lot of older CRPGs made, which is that they tend to front-load intelligence with too much stuff. Basically, intelligence gets you more XP and more skill points, meaning that not only are you capable of doing more stuff immediately by just having more intelligence, but it also makes you level up faster, which gets you to those next milestones faster. This is something old CRPGs did a lot. So I don't know if that's necessarily the intention or not, but basically you're going to want to max intelligence straight away as a result of this, because it speeds up progression so much and is going to give you so much more access to all of the other skills and checks throughout the game that it makes it possible to basically see everything. And what makes this even more crazy is that you can also do this with all of the companions you run into. And between you and all of your party doing this exact thing, you can basically get full coverage for all of your skills. Combine all of that with maxing out speed as much as possible to get you action points to take more actions in combat, and you're basically off to the races. More on that a little bit later, however, because next up we're going to talk about story. So I mentioned that you begin the game as an ex-prisoner, or an escaped prisoner as you are about to escape, but you are in particular imprisoned by a galactic corporation known as Star Frontiers. In your escape, you meet with a ship AI that helps you escape, as it wants its freedom, and you and this AI sort of team up before crash landing on this planet as you escape this prison ship. The catch here is you shortly find out after this that Star Frontiers is planning a reprisal to this sector, I believe known as the Null Sector, that they had actually abandoned some time ago, but they've been sort of gathering their forces, licking their wounds, and they're about to bring a cleansing fire to this place. And so, in order to maintain your escape status, you and this AI are going to hopefully make the moves necessary to defeat this incoming reprisal. That involves going around a bunch of different planets, making inroads with the populations and governments there in order to set up all of these planets for the defense of this incoming invasion, which involves doing things like increasing war score, doing research, ideally recruiting people, etc., etc. Now, again, my big critique of this narrative is that it's a little too easy to get the perfect solutions to the problem. Like most planets, there's 5 different planets, involve some sort of conflict between two groups, and there's an option to bring them together in most cases, and that is pretty easy to do. Nonetheless, though, how you go about all of this, the choices you make, the things you do, all of that ultimately contributes to your war score and how prepared the planets and stuff are for this incoming invasion, which helps determine the game's various end states. There's some fun stuff in there, like the desert planet of Nabi and the executives versus the workers on this water planet whose name I cannot pronounce, the typical amalgamation of mercenaries and pirates to fight along the way, and it's a good, like, sort of space opera setup that was enjoyable. And I think the narrative is likely what you would enjoy most about this game if you played it for yourself. But that does bring us to the progression systems. Progression in this game comes down to a few things, primarily leveling up, grabbing gear, but then also your base upgrades. So, for the most part, kill things in combat, pass checks, packs, complete quests, you will gain experience. You level up every so often, and when you level up, you can allocate your earned skills and perk points. Skills are determined by things like your intelligence and whatnot. You get 2 perks per level generally, unless that is influenced by something like one of your backgrounds or conviction status, with perks themselves costing between 2, 4, 6, or 8 perk points to get the perk point of that tier. So those typically influence combat a little more directly than, say, your skills, which you can increase like either weapons or an exploration skill, you could say. So weapons and the like will obviously make you more deadly with that type of weapon, whereas things like computers, finance, etc. gives you more options and interactions. So typically what you would likely do is pick a specific combat skill for a character and then what skills you want them to take on in terms of exploration, and then of course spread that out amongst your party as you are going to be picking up companions and you're good to go. Now the other side of this is gear. Each character can equip up to 2 weapons, a primary and secondary, a helmet, some body armor, as well as a sort of accessory that typically increases your skills in some way. There is stuff with those items that you'll be picking up that allows you to make better use of them. But the big thing for combat at least is really upping the hit chance with the weapons by increasing your skills with them so you can actually hit something. Then there is your base itself. As you go around the map, you'll be hoovering up all sorts of resources, potentially scanning planets out in the galaxies for them as well, and you will spend those alongside research points at your base in order to upgrade it. You can also upgrade it by simply recruiting people to join your cause, and a big part of the war score is that as well, but in particular you get access to a research station that, as you acquire science points by learning about the science of all the places you've been, can let you start getting upgrades for your base directly. This can include things like various crafting stations alongside a bounty terminal, a bunch of upgrades to your defenses, things like that, to make all of them more resilient to things. And this is where you're going to get just kind of all of those various upgrades for your base. So that's part of progression as well here. And it also gives you a reason to stop in every once in a while and check your comms, which can lead to like side quests and the like, which is as good a place as any to run into the gameplay and world side of this thing. From your base, you are going to fly your acquired ship around the solar systems of the different places we will be going. So the game is largely divided up into your planets that you'll be exploring and then the wider solar systems that you can run around in a little bit. Now, in the solar system sections, you can typically go around and either hoover up resources from planets after scanning them, hit some, not exactly random, but encounters along the way, interacting with other ships, potentially fighting them off, that kind of thing. The rest of it, however, is exploring the game's various planets and interacting with all sorts of people, of course, to take on their quests. Now, along the way, you're going to meet a handful of companions you can recruit, robots as well as humans. Robots typically have more restrictions about what they can equip, however, humans are a little more malleable, and each planet has a sort of scenario you have to get to the bottom of, or as mentioned, try to negotiate a peace so you can get all of them to contribute back to your greater goal of defending the system. Now, there are some interesting scenarios here to explore. As I mentioned, there's the water planet where the 2 factions are fighting for a dwindling number of resources. There is the desert planet where they are just kind of stranded here, and all along the way you're basically going to learn about Star Frontier's people that they left behind and just completely abandoned when they lost the sector. There's an ice planet where you have to deal with some of the troops they left behind and get to the bottom of that. Dealing with space pirates, just kind of the whole gamut of things you would probably expect from a game like this, and all of it's done pretty well. There's typically things you have to work around, like on the water planet, there's a big turret that you have to find a way to deactivate to get to some mercenaries that are holed up there. There's like a heist quest after that you can do. But all in all, it's a simple and sort of straightforward experience where you explore these planets and these galaxies looking for ways to increase your war score and the like so you can be ready for the incoming invasion, with the quality of that writing, mostly, in my opinion at least, being pretty good stuff that is worth an experience. And finding different ways through situations is a big part of that as well. It is not uncommon for plenty of quests to have different solutions, either straight up combat or potentially finding a way to talk your way around it, or kill the people you would be in combat with in a way that has nothing to do with combat. There are, however, some instances where that's not really an option and you're going to have to engage in combat, but for the most part, it stays pretty flexible. However, let's go ahead and actually talk a little bit about that combat system more directly. So, combat is a basic turn-based setup. What you can do is largely determined by your stats, how many action points you have, how it affects your ability with like weapons and everything. It is a grid-based system, and on your turn, you can spend your action points to either move or attack. You can also choose whether or not to manually control companions. As simple as this game is, I found the AI controlling them was fine. They will mostly move to attack as you would expect. There's not really like a cover system or anything. And so, as I mentioned, combat is a bit bursty, and it comes down to simply trying to go first and hoping that you get the one-hit KOs that you are after here. Now, hit chance is a big part of this. Your hit chance by default is relatively low, and you're going to want to increase your skills with the weapons you have, as well as hopefully find other ways and means like stats and items, etc., to increase that hit chance further, allowing you to more reliably kill these enemies. Now, there are options like applying status effects to enemies, setting them on fire, poisoning them. I personally just found that most of that stuff didn't really have a place in combat because it either didn't work fast enough or didn't do enough damage to the point of being meaningless. Like, you can heal in combat. However, the healing is usually to the tune of 100 damage, but if I only have 600 health and the enemy's either going to one-tap me or I live and do the same to them, there's just not a lot of reason to engage with those side systems, and I think if I were to critique this bit of combat, the big thing here would really be trying to make a lot of those secondary options more useful. Because as it stands, I would argue that engaging with them is usually not the best use of your time or resources because of, again, how all of the damage numbers swing. And so combat pretty much always devolves into this slugfest back and forth where either you or the enemy dies, and on normal at least, that's incredibly easy to swing in your favor, especially when you can start attacking multiple times per turn with really good weapons. On higher difficulties, it was more back and forth, but kind of much the same as a result, and I didn't really feel the need to use anything in terms of extra abilities or whatnot outside of the first planet, where your options are a little more reined in and you kind of have to find some ways to do something, especially as you get your full team of companions with you, because while you'll get a lot more than this, you can have up to 3 of them with you at a time in combat, and between the 4 of you, ideally all built out pretty well, I mean, you're just going to destroy enemies after a certain point. And this is why I would say, if anything, for a game like this, where the emphasis is really more about the stronger narrative than it is the combat system itself, I would actually consider putting in an option to just skip the combat altogether, or have it sort of roll up stats based on equipment and whatnot for a % chance of winning that encounter. And I think the RNG of that wouldn't be that much different than what's in there now. But like I said, combat's not exactly the game's focal point. Next up, we're going to talk about the Steam Deck a bit before we start wrapping this one up. So for the Steam Deck, the important things to know are that this game only has partial controller support, and all of the text and everything on screen is going to be quite small on the Steam Deck screen. Other than that, it's a pretty standard crpg experience where, yes, the Steam Deck is more than capable of playing this game, but you're probably going to have to do things like set up controls exactly how you want them, mess around with buttons and settings to try to make it a little more of an engaging user experience, because this is just a type of game I don't think plays particularly well on that platform, especially without some of the bigger features that would have come from it not being an indie game like AA or AAA, etc. But with the limited resources that this person probably had, I just don't really see that happening. And as a result, can you play this on the Steam Deck? Yes. Is it the best way to play it? Probably not. Which brings us to the positives, negatives, and then we will wrap this thing up. So on the positive side of things, it really comes down to the overall story and the choices for me. I found a lot of the writing engaging. It was fun trying to find ways to, of course, ramp up your war score and make sure that you were prepared for these incoming invasions. A lot of the side quests that you don't have to do outside in the exploration of the galaxy part were a lot of fun. And there were a lot of interesting situations that just finding my way through and finding fun solutions to those problems are really where a game like this, I think, shines, and it captures that idea of a sort of wider space opera pretty well, and I think those are probably the main reasons you would pick something like this up. But, of course, there were some negatives. As I mentioned, the balancing is a bit rough, combat especially, but also down to the way skills and stuff are allocated, where it's just often super easy to find the best sort of perfect solution to the problems you are presented with in terms of applying diplomacy and trying to get to the bottom of those things. And if anything, I think having to make the player work for those moments a little more would make the game itself a little more engaging, but I do also, on the flip side of that, know some people are going to appreciate that as the game sort of respecting your time, especially for an indie title like this. So where people fall on that specifically might be a little hit or miss, but for me, that is kind of where it is, which brings me to my conclusion. Sector Unknown is $25 US, and for that price, you are getting a fun little indie CRPG that I have to say is pretty impressive for a game made by essentially one person. CRPGs in particular are notoriously difficult to make, and the fact that they managed to do all of this is an impressive effort, it really is. Now, this game is obviously very rough around the edges, but if you're a big fan of the genre or are looking for something kind of fun in that space opera vein, then I think Sector Unknown is a pretty good time, and again, $25 US. So for all of that, I'm going to go ahead and give it a buy, of course, which is where we are going to wrap up this particular review. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, let me know how you feel about it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.